Yeah.
You don't want to switch like?
Because then I put it on YouTube.
Okay.
After this, yeah. It's centered. It is. Yeah. Yeah, I'll fix. So well, I will tell us. We get some treat.
On la voit bien. On voit bien la partie.
We can serenade them. Hello? Good? I think so. Bien. Got it. They were in Paris. That's good. Did you see in Paris? Did you see Mpii? Yeah.
So you speak a little bit of French.
Je parle, boy.
What is the story like?
Maman parle français. Le monde speak
Wow.
French.
That's a good one. Before we get into the book, I want us first to get to know and learn about who is Nasozi. And by the way, am I pronouncing it correctly? Nasozi?
Yes.
The French way?
The French way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So who is Nasozi? I want to hear about your story.
Wow, story.
And welcome everybody. By the way, yes, I haven't did it properly. My name is Jacqueline Ngo Mpii. I'm the founder and owner of the African Decor. That is a concept store, art gallery, and community space here where we have dynamic programming, as you can see, and welcome authors, but also designers. We host exhibitions and create exhibition. So it's a place for African creativity from people of African descent from all over the world. We have a selection of art, design, craftsmanship, jewelry, and of course photo books. And we are very, very pleased to have been chosen by Nasozi for our Paris French. And to hear you, Karen, we have been working on this for a couple of months now. And it's a pleasure to have you.
Merci beaucoup, Jacqueline. And it's a pleasure to be here. I will begin this by even starting with our story, our histoire, origine, religion. Jacqueline and I met.
Oh yeah, hold on a second. Oh, that is a special delivery. Thank you. Can you come please? It's for her.
Oh wow!
That is
beautiful. These are gorgeous. Oh my goodness.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
It was just I have this is for the cameras, but we have a
beautiful.
Yeah, a little treatment here. Seeing an altar myself, having lunch by book. Every time an author comes here and do the signing, especially women, we give them the flowers.
Oh, these are so
congratulations
beautiful.
on the launch of your first book. It's a huge milestone, so we want you to know about it.
Oh, this is so special, and I love the flowers. It's one of my rides. Oh, fantastic. We can stick them here for decoration.
Yes. Yes.
Can you still see that on the camera?
Yes.
Okay.
Good. So let's keep
So yes.
your story.
Yeah, so for our story, Jacqueline and I met 2 years ago, almost to the day. I was here for a short holiday with my son, who was going from middle school to high school, and he had never really visited Europe. He was curious about Paris, and we have family here in Paris. We have family also in Berlin, so we came to Paris and Berlin, and meeting Jacqueline was like on my bucket list. And we had been following each other on Instagram for some years prior already, so we were already
And we have a common friend.
we have common friends. So I just popped in one afternoon and we spent quite a bit of time like chatting and getting to know each other. I think by that time I had just submitted my manuscript, so I wasn't even so much thinking about the tour or the space. I mean, I was genuinely just coming in here to shop, and you were doing there was a pop-up that day. It was a Cameroonian designer.
Oh.
She was, I think, in this space here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I still have her.
Oh, okay, nice. So that's the beginning of our story.
Yeah.
But what I think that's an example for me of my entry point into any city and any culture. I always go where the cultural spaces are, where the artisan spaces are, where the entrepreneurs are, where the creatives are, because I found that no matter where I am in the world, that is always a home. And this is that place. Little African Village is that place. Was that place for me that summer day, is that place for so many other people around the world. So for me, when I did start thinking about the book tour, I was like, this is what I want to bring and how I want to bring the book to Paris. So thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thank you. It's good. So what is your special story with Paris? And your mom does speak French. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, so my mother was a cultural, I grew up in Washington, D.C., outside of Washington, D.C., and my mother was a cultural attaché and public affairs attaché for various African embassies. She's American, but she traveled to Sierra Leone for the first time when she was, I think, 17 or 18. So this was before, there were any hashtags or TikTok or people who were just going to countries to tick off a box. She was really among the first of her generation, and like especially Black students, university students, to go to Africa. That was almost unheard of in the 60s. So that's when her love affair began with Africa, and in particular West Africa, which is funny because my father is East African, but she's so much more oriented toward West Africa, and I think that has to do with a lot of it. And so she began, learning French, and she got very involved in that cultural connection between Washington, D.C. and the African diaspora population there. Primarily through the embassies, but also introducing and bringing in African designers in fashion, introducing them into the American market. And so I think the first was in fact Al-Fadi. So she worked with an African art gallery in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., and they were really pivotal in introducing Al-Fadi at that time. This was in the early 90s, maybe, or late 80s, so long ago, which is how I've come to know Mulai, who, we're cousins. When people say, oh, you have family in Paris, I'm like, yes, I have. When I come to, this is the first time I think I've come here where I'm just staying on my own because I just have such a busy program, but I come here and that's home for me. I was having dinner with, the family the other day. So that is essentially how I grew up in that, very much so.
But you say that your father was from East Africa.
Yes.
So what is the story about that?
So my parents met in Germany.
Okay, so there's a name for
To
Germany.
confuse you even more.
Okay.
It's
So in Germany.
They met in Germany. German was also spoken in my home growing up. I don't really speak. I speak much more French than I do German. But they met in Germany. My mother was living initially there with her first husband, and then she went to university there, continued her university, graduate school there, and she was modeling and doing a complete Renaissance woman. She was doing all of the things. And then my father was in medical school, and they were working in the same hospital, but it was friends who introduced them. So,
And at some point they decided to move to the United States.
yeah, so my mother was in Germany for 20 years. And my father was there for 5 years. and they decided to move to the United States after he graduated his medical school program, and he had an option to continue on in Saudi Arabia or to continue on at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And he selected the option to go to Howard. So that's how we got to Washington, D.C.
So we focus on this because that's how you been spoken. You talk about your mom and your link with the American with Africa and your art. So your mom decided to work in the police affairs traveling here. Can you say that she was also a collector and you grew up in that context?
Yes.
Seeing all these objects that she was actually collecting from different
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we actually touched on this yesterday when we were just hanging out casually, but it's a custom primarily in West Africa that when you have a guest, you give them a gift, a parting gift of a textile. So my mother had and has troves of bogolan, indigo, ashoke, tons of this because she had been traveling back and forth throughout for many years. Yeah. And so in addition to growing up around those textiles, which she was gifted and would be around the house in various displays or in different ways, we also had different items and objects from Uganda that my father was bringing back and forth when he would go visit. And it wasn't for many years until I went myself because there was a lot of instability there. And there were many times where he went and he didn't know if he was going to make it back. And sometimes he almost did not make it back. So I think that's also something we have to also lend some understanding around, is that sometimes depending on family situations, political situations, our depth of connection to that aspect of our heritage in the diaspora is different. It's different for everybody. We can't just all go back. Even to this day, there are certain countries and friends who are not just able to go back because of particular circumstances. So for me, the objects and the baskets and the cowhide, which is the impala hide, which is very significant in my Baganda culture and tribe, those were the connections for me, because it's like, wow, my dad just brought this back from this place that I've never been. I talked on the phone with them, like for Easter and Christmas, because even then it was difficult to talk. Oh, it wasn't WhatsApp. We could call them right now if we wanted to. I'm in Paris. You couldn't do that. You couldn't do that before. So there were other ways that we had to establish and maintain a connection. And for me, I just remember the excitement around the baskets coming here.
But you were surrounded by all this were you curious to know about the history behind this object, and does your curiosity actually served by your parents to understanding and all that, or it's just there and you really got it finally when you were on the road to start before
More so the latter. I wasn't curious about that.
It was just there.
It was just there. It was just beautiful. I didn't wonder or concern myself with the significance.
We talk a lot about education and raising children, and we know that the more exposure we get to something, we see the results. So
exactly.
Just being surrounded by it and not getting the explanation of the books still means that you know what else somehow absorbing.
Exactly. Those seeds of curiosity were being connected. I think that was exactly the case and how it played out, because once I got much older and I could even think about it more critically, I realized in fact there wasn't much information.
Yeah.
At least for the
and what got you into so you grew up, you start getting interest. Yeah. But something that also we can talk about is what is your profession, because before writing the book you're also professional in church. So what got you into design and making it.
Right. So initially I wanted to be an architect. That's earn my degree in art history, and then I will return to architecture for graduate school. So art history, which for me was like, I never thought about art history. And some people, people would joke at that time, like, art history, like, what are you going to do with art history? Well, now I can say, this is what you can do with art history. Because I remember, having these writing marathons when we had our exams, like, we just really had to write. And I still have a lot of those booklets. You had to write everything by hand, these essays, and it exposed me to certain artistic genres that I didn't instantly care about, like 15th century Italian art. I did not care whatsoever. But I actually learned a lot about, like, Christianity, for example, things I never knew. I'm like, wow, that's, the storytelling aspect of the art. And so I grew to appreciate really that curiosity for me grew. I took African art history class, so I was now introduced to it from. I was at University of Maryland, so not far from Howard. Sometimes I took classes at Howard in fact, but I was not. I was up the road, up the street from Howard. Started thinking about art and the stories and the history of art in a different way for the first time. And then when it came time for graduate school to apply for programs, I applied for architecture. And I also, at the same time, discovered urban planning. Like, literally, I didn't know what urban planning was, but in those days, I'm aging myself now. In those days, you had to physically, get a physical application, and then, I think, fill it out. So I don't know how you applied, Michelle. You were not even in the country. So I went to the admissions office at Columbia and got the physical booklet for the application, and there were some other student publications on the same desk. So I said, I'm going to pick this up and then read these back home on the train. I was living in Brooklyn at the time. Columbia is in Harlem, long train ride. So on the train ride home on the train, I was reading these publications, and one of them was an urban planning student publication. And I was like, this is really cool. This is what I want to do. So on the application, all I had to do was check one other box to apply for that program in addition to the architecture program. So at Columbia, I got into urban planning, but I still didn't get into architecture. So long story short, I absolutely love the urban planning program. It's so multidisciplinary, from economics to project management to the design and layout of cities, the policies and the conversations that influence and impact who has access to what services, what infrastructure. And from that point though, I still was really aching for something in design. So many years later, I just decided to do my own thing. And that's how I came around to the product design and the African artisans throughout the continent, and the interior design, in fact, as an extension of the product.
So you immediately created your business?
No.
Okay, so that's the thing.
Not even.
So from school, where did you start working immediately in somewhere?
So what did I do? So I've lived so many lives. Between undergraduate and graduate school, I did work in architecture. I worked for 2 firms in New York City. And then after graduate school, when I was in my urban planning program, I really taught the policy development part. I wanted to wear a suit and tie, or I don't know what they do. I wanted to wear a suit and go to the UN every day. Yeah. That's what I wanted. And make a difference in the world. In that big auditorium, right? You know the one. That's what I wanted to do. That's what I thought I wanted to do. And then I got my first job at a human rights and social justice clinic with one of the largest in the world. And so that was where I wanted to be, in fact. And so we did a lot of human rights grant making to organizations that were marginalized, organizations that continue and are even more so persecuted today around the world. And so that was a very fulfilling job for many years, but it wasn't giving me that creative, artistic piece that was also very much.
So at some point, you left for
Yes. So I started my brand, XM Studio, 2 years into that job, and I started it like as a side hustle. Excuse me. I started it on the side, and I didn't necessarily have, aspirations of it making it my full-time job one day. I hadn't even so much, like that wasn't even. I hadn't seen too many people making that leap yet. I think there's a lot of conversation now around like entrepreneurship and creative entrepreneurship, but like we didn't even have that language then to even dream about what that could look like. I just knew that I enjoyed making clothes and it brought some decent, reasonable like side income so that I could like save money. But the demand was increased. This was in 2011 that I founded the XO Studio, that I founded the brand. And 2 years later, by 2013, there was business had really picked up. And
So you were, just to understand, so you were, let me say, so just to understand what was Access Studio. Was it a platform, consulting, a website, a shop online, or what was it?
So good question. Exit Studio was literally it started out just pillows made from tissue, made from African wax fabric.
That you were selling where online?
So I started just selling them at markets in person in Brooklyn.
Where were you having them done? Where you were in Africa, or you were just having them cut and making, having it made in the US?
So I was making everything myself.
You were
Yes.
making
Everything.
So, okay, so
And
so
I
you
was
learned how to.
I learned how to make the pillows. I learned how to sew. And in fact, when I was a young kid, I was already very handy and crafty. Like I would design clothes and like even hairstyles. Like I would braid my own hair, cornrows, extensions, everything. So I was always very tactile.
So the products that you were creating were people actually making brand
Exactly. And then so initially it was just me selling them at markets in Brooklyn until one day somebody asked me, do you have a website? And I was like, nope. Not now, but I will tomorrow. So
like a true New Yorker. Yes, you're
probably by that night. I had a website.
Wow.
But it was Etsy. I created an Etsy store. And so for many years that was my platform. I didn't even have my similar website. I just had my Etsy shop. But I was getting customers from all over the world. In fact, and I was curious because I had a decent amount of customers at that time from Paris. And I was like, this is great, but I know you can find this in Paris. Like, why are you ordering from me? I didn't say that, but it really.
And it was 2011.
By this time it was, 2011, 2013.
Yeah, we were not there yet.
Intrinsically,
Well, not that much.
Not in that, like, maybe
It
like.
was the beginning. We are, like, I can remember pretty much 2012 and 13.
Okay.
Like, we are, they were a generation of entrepreneurs in African culture that was starting like in 2013, but it was actually like 2012, 2013. We were not there yet.
Interesting. I mean, but when you say you weren't there yet, you were there in a different way. I mean,
We were there in a different, I mean,
maybe not on Etsy per se, but
okay,
somebody
maybe
would
the
really have to
difference,
know,
the
like.
difference maybe is that in Paris, all of these social exist, but it was not black entrepreneurs, African entrepreneurs,
Right,
Italians, were making it.
Okay.
It was very expensive. It was like stores, places that were actually not actually speaking to us, so we were not the kind of. So maybe it did exist, but for my generation, I don't recall that we were having different brands like that was here, or so many over like the longer British
It was.
yeah, it was so big.
Yeah.
It was so big. No, we didn't have it. It was big there in 2012.
Yeah. She came soon after. So I met, she came to my London launch. Yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah.
I enjoy her. Yeah.
So you were one of the pioneers. Anyway, let's keep moving on. That's very interesting. So you started like that, and you grow your community online, and selling content take an interior design started?
Yeah, so that happened very organically as well, because in addition to, you know, in a way I'm a full service one-stop shop woman. Like, I make the products and then I began like styling them for photographs to put on my website, and you know, really, I lived in a brownstone apartment at that time, so really making sure like every space was curated in a way that I could just take photographs of the work to get it on my website quickly. And over time, people started seeing this online. They're like, wait a minute, like you style that, you do this way, can you do my house too? And I was like, okay. So that's how it happened. I never put myself forward intentionally as an interior designer, but then of course having the background in architecture I had, it gave me that, like, you know, that type of credential, and in addition to having that visual portfolio online and on my website, thanks to the products that I was creating.
So when was the moment where you picked the job? And
so that's interesting too, and maybe to an extent you can identify with this as well. The moment that made it for me, like, really for the job, it actually had a lot more to do with a personal life balance than it did the job itself. It was a very comfortable job. I had free healthcare. I didn't even realize that, like, you know, how big of a deal that is in America until I had to figure out healthcare on my own. I'm still figuring out healthcare. But my son was about to enter into primary school, elementary school. And when I looked at like the schedule for his, you know, the beginning of school opens at this time and it ends at this time. And if I keep this job in the city, I have to be there at this time and back at that time. And if I'm not back at that time, then I have to pay somebody this much to pick him up. And it literally wasn't adding up. It literally wasn't adding up. So I was like, I just want to do this myself. I want to have a job that actually accommodates, you know, the contours of motherhood. And so I really took a chance on myself, and I took a chance on that because that's how important it was. And I just, you know, I wanted to like go on my son's field trips. I think for the first 2 years I chaperoned every single field trip for his school, but I'm like, this is why I'm doing this. Like, this is also a business, but I'm developing and designing it in a way that gives me the possibility to show up in my life in other ways. And like being a mother it still is very important to me. So that was really what pushed me to have the courage to make that leap. Yeah.
okay, so what year was it?
By that time was 2013.
2013.
Yeah.
Where is the
Are we?
and now you have a book. So what made you at what point you decided that, okay, now I need to write a book about African Decor?
Right. So what I love so much about this journey and the community that it has built for me is that so much of what I do is informed by the questions that you all ask me. Because like the woman who said, well, do you have a website? And I was like, I will tomorrow. People were asking me at my different, you know, pop-up shops or pop-up markets, whatever, especially once I started like creating catalogs. I was doing this kind of seasonal catalog. I call it spring collection and winter collection. Really being meticulous about like the graphic design and the whole formatting of it. And I would get a few of them printed out and then carry them around with me if I was introducing my work to a store or doing an event at a market, a holiday or something. And customers started saying to me, like, if this were a book, I would buy this. Or they would even ask me, is this for sale? And I'm like, it's just my catalog. Yeah. So it was really that customer curiosity and appetite for a book. And then as time went on, I had one or two close friends of mine who were writing their books. And so I was like, oh, people do write books. People I know write books. Maybe I could do this one day as well, but it still quite didn't gel until I think there was one season, because I because, too, like entrepreneurship and having your own thing is it's cyclical. Like sometimes they're really busy and sometimes they're really quiet. And as spend so many years doing this, you figure out what you can do, what else you can do in those quiet moments, whether that's rest or strategizing or coming up with a book. So there was one winter where it was just like really, really quiet, and I had the quiet around me to think about what other ways or what other projects, what else can I do with my time right now? And that's when I had the opportunity to, in fact, return to the proposal, which I had started years prior, and just didn't have the quiet and the space in my life to really dedicate toward building out the proposal. But,
how long did that take you to actually, when you finally had this?
yeah.
How long did that take you?
So from the moment that I realized, I realized I needed a book agent for the publisher that I wanted. Some publishers, you can submit a proposal to them, and they may or may not look at it. They're like, if we do get back to you, it could be 9 months or a year from now. But if you work with an agent, they're going to see it. That doesn't necessarily mean you have a deal right away, but there's almost a better guarantee, a better chance that they will see a proposal and perhaps give you some feedback on it. So I realized that the publisher that I wanted to be published with, because I liked other books that they had published and other authors that they had worked with, including Jacqueline Ngo Mpii, who wrote my foreword, they only accepted from literary agents. So then I was like, okay, what's that? I think I actually Googled, like, what is a literary agent? I had no idea. This was before ChatGPT, so very analog. I Googled it. So from the point where I reached out to one agent, in fact, because I also determined like that was the agent that I wanted. But I had a list, I had a short list, but I was like, I'm going to put all of my eggs, I'm not put all of my eggs in one basket kind of girl. I know that like people always advise against that, but I don't have the energy or the time to like have my hands in all of these. I'm like, I know what I want, that's what I want. And once I have a clear yes or no, then I'll move accordingly. So the agent loved the concept that I shared with her. So we continued to refine the proposal because I already almost had a full proposal thanks to my friend Hawa Hassan, who wrote and published in Bibi's Kitchen. She just published her second book, and Setting a Place for Us. And she gave me her proposal, like a template from her first book, and she sent it to me in 2016. That's how long I had it in my email. It was like an old email address. So I pulled that up again, and I just followed kind of her template, the outline, and that accelerated my timeline on the front end, because once I put in my ideas and my right, maybe now ChatGPT would do that. But even though I still would
that friend it's a good friend. Invaluable,
completely invaluable. I mean, that alone saved me probably 6 months of work, at least 6 months. So once my agent, Kate, and I refined the proposal and shared like some examples and example photography, and I actually wrote the introduction at that stage, pretty much as it was published here. She submitted it to her publishing podcast, and the book went to auction, which means at the time I also didn't know what that meant. So what is it? So when your book goes to auction, it means that more than one publisher or multiple publishers want your book, and they essentially end up bidding against, not essentially, they do end up bidding against each other for your book. And this all happens online, so she's getting like a flurry of emails like and the negotiating points are the cost of the advance, but then also certain terms, so like how many book copies and percentage of royalties, you can really get into those legal areas as well. But of course the headline is always the advance. But for this book, there were 7 publishers who wanted this book. So they were competing from, publishers in Sydney, Australia, to New York, to each of those interviews with my responses to questions. I'm like, okay, if they ask me this is what I'm going to say. And then I got there, and I realized, no, I didn't ask me the questions. They were the ones who had to respond to me, and I was like, so after the first one, I quickly changed my mindset. But I realized, no, they're in the hot seat. I'm not the one. There were some questions, because they were like, and maybe this is a question that will come up from you guys, but they were like, how are you going to make this? How are you going to make this book? Like, you want to go to all these places and speak with all of these artisans. How are you going to do this? Just from a logistical.
So that's very interesting point. That now that you're saying it, I'm realizing that I haven't looked at that question, but it's so interesting. When we talk about making books, especially from design books, that we need to train different people that are based in different countries, right? You had a position. So how do you fund all these travels and the pictures? Right. Is it something that's taken into transportation? Right. Or is it something that can happen?
Yeah. Excellent question. This is all me.
Oh, what?
Every single. The trip, me being here, the Jean and Bissau. But here's the thing, and this is why it's so important. I think the value of being an entrepreneur, I couldn't do this had I not ever run a business. Because I knew from the outset, I worked backwards, like I anticipated and projected what my costs would be, at least for the first 6 months to a year out. And I made sure to negotiate for those costs into the advance. So into the amount that they were going to give me. So it was up to me to not spend all of my money when I got it. Like the check looked nice, but I had to make that check last for years. You know what I'm saying? So these are things that as entrepreneurs we say cash flow. You know what cash flow is, and if this is, this expense is going to be anticipated for December or July of 2025.
So how long then did that took you? I still don't get it. Okay. How long did that took you from the moment you finally paid the insurance to this?
That was May of 2022.
Okay.
I left in June to start research. So
it took you 3 years? I mean, 2 years?
3 years.
All the time. By yourself? Oh, you already have publicity?
So there was a whole mixture. In fact, even before I had the book deal, a good friend of mine was in Cote d'Ivoire.
Okay.
She was getting her PhD. She was doing some independent research. She was there from London. And I was like, hey, Emma, hey girl. She's actually like, hey girl, so I want to write this book. I don't have a book deal yet, but I really feel like I'm going to get a book deal. Can you do some of my research and pictures? She's an amazing photographer as well. So I was like, can you do this bit for me? Because I really, really want these artisans in this book. And again, no book deal yet, but I know that I feel that it's coming. So I fronted, again, this wasn't even a book deal for me. I fronted my own money because I compensated her and I compensated every artisan in this book as well. So, yeah, absolutely. So this was in April, so this was still about 1 month before the book deal was signed.
So it took your approximately 2 years.
Exactly. Yeah,
That's long.
Long.
Wow. That's long. I think that we don't realize it's good to talk about it because just like you mentioned at the beginning, entrepreneurship is something that is filled with hype right now.
Right. Yeah, it's real
And
sexy.
even traditional book has become really hype.
Right.
And I think it's good for people to hear all of the learning and it's the investments.
The investment.
And because being an entrepreneurship doesn't necessarily mean that you just have to give your manuscript and then you sit down and then you get all the and you do everything. You still have to be an entrepreneur even if you
We still have to hustle. I'm hustling every day. Every day.
Okay. Wow. That's also lessons of resilience,
And you have to also really love what you're writing about. You have to love what you're doing because if you don't love it, you're not going to win it.
Yeah.
You not going to finish. You really have to love it. You really have to be crazy about it.
That's good. So now let's get deep into the book and artisans and the topic. So I found it very interesting that the book highlights 60 continents in 10 months. And I think the mix is really very unique in this type of books. That is using their represent primarily on cultural stories. These objects, these material, and it has the softness, and this is how the process is making it, and this is the process is, and we never really hear from the artisans. And to me, it's the first thing that's good. It's in faces of artists, hearing their names and hearing the names of their original country. And it's totally also in the way that when it comes to African objects and whether it's mass or object, what is it called in the culture of emulating the artists? In the traditional African art, there is a term that says artists. So most of the objects only get the name of the tribe. Okay, this is the Kubata. This is the Baulu sculpture. This is the Kudu mask. You only hear names of tribes. You never know the artists. So it's really, really good. And I found that approach was very unique. And I want you to tell us how you get that invitation.
Yes. So specifically, as it relates to the names, I think once we really begin to decolonize the way we categorize and think about the world, the names are inherently important. It's almost a question of why aren't the names there as opposed to why are the names there.
And you start the book by doing
yes,
you have to
absolutely.
You have to put the artisans first.
Absolutely. I don't know in what world it's okay to erase a full name, and what conscious and what moral code that's okay. And so it was not even a question for me. That was one of the motivations. Like I literally wanted to know people's names, even when I'm at a restaurant and somebody's serving me. What is your name? These are human interactions. And, so out of curiosity, I wanted to know people's names, and I also genuinely believe I'm not the only one who's curious about it. And so from that point, I mean, once that was established, once I established that, I approached it categorically from my more product designer, interior designer, design frame. So categorizing based on the function and the way the objects are used in the interior space, and also qualifying at each, at the very outset as well by saying these objects are not created with an interior design purpose in mind, but this is how we come to use them in a contemporary lifestyle. This is often now how they're sold. So acknowledging that, and then having a conversation that allows us to continue to think about the significance of the objects in the homes, in our homes, and the people who make them, and not erasing and not divorcing the reality of the object from what it becomes in another space, in another context. And then for the 16 artisans, the 9 countries, I wanted to make sure that there was pretty equitable geographic distribution around the continent. A lot of times we hear about sub-Saharan Africa and I don't even know, northern Africa. And I think that's a very false dichotomy. I don't think that exists. It's not any more relevant than, it's just not relevant. Like, who came up with that? And again, why do we call this sub-Saharan? And half of the countries that they call North African are in the Sahara. So what point is it sub? So I wanted to get rid of that entirely because I don't subscribe to this division, which then has a lot of other political and social, you know, schisms attached to it.
And how do you compensate them? Say that
Yeah.
which I find very interesting because there is a lot of book about Africa. And I thought that Africa existed so, and even today with the social media, there are so many pictures and
Right.
pictures out there,
Right.
and people make money, you know, when you have to pay by pay by pay by YouTube, when you bring people and show, and people show how it's food, you know, how it's cooked, and you never make a currency.
Right.
So what makes you actually want to be a long
So that's another point where it never crossed my mind to not compensate. I would never. I mean, part of it is the history that you just explained. It's a very exploitative and like convenient way of somehow othering African people and African subjects as like they don't need to be compensated. Like these are active participants and contributors to the book. Of course, I'm going to compensate. And then when it came down also to like how much, I went by, I would ask like people on the ground there. So in Ethiopia, the photographers who I worked with, they were also, you know, basically, you know, they did everything with me. They worked closely with my friend Hannah, who was also in the book, and I was in the book, but she's the founder of Holy Road Textiles. So she's had a long-standing relationship with the photographers who I worked with in Ethiopia. And I asked them, like, what do you advise is the appropriate compensation? And that was my note for the other countries as well. And so that worked because there's also a tremendous, you know, difference in economies around the continent. So just going off of, you know, not coming in this way, like I'm limited, I know everything, I know how much to pay, and I'm, you know, very much like I'm here to learn, and I'm trusting you as well. Like there was a huge component of what I
Did you
did.
share, like, I'm sure that there are a lot of books about African, and even there's African landscape or culture, there's a lot of books about African textile. I mean, when I say a lot, I have a lot.
Like maybe 5.
But did it ever share that they have been compensated before, or have been participating or picture?
I have no idea, and I don't know at what point like that would ever be disclosed. Because even with my publisher, they never asked me, never cared. Nobody asked me that. I was doing that on my own, like my own moral code. And I'm really like again, I mean, for me, it was practical.
But
But
it's
it's
also,
also
because you talk, it's the reason why I'm saying that they're living in the community to talk a lot about this compassion. And making the globalization here, because it will be other thing that's struggling is that you have an entire tax that often for education. And I find it very interesting that you have a black person and you also will call yourself, put yourself in a very control of the creation, like you usually say. Let me read that first.
Find the passage.
Okay. Here I am. So it's on page 6.
Everybody turns
Whether you're 18 with before from the African Decor, or you have been a community just for you, you might be wondering whether it's appropriate to make this a part of the curriculum, and if you don't have the control over the connection. But it's that hard. And you said the short answer is yes. I am together and like American University of so I have a direct relation to nationally, but not all. The African Decor I have in my own itself and or who have worked with artisans like my woman of my but I have educated myself extensively on the background of which is in large part what I'm calling the and you give guidelines in the next page actually for people to follow and be more ethical, be more ethical shopping, living under the freedom. So how do you tap into that conclusion and decide to put it on the
So the way that I came to my conclusion that African decor, consumer objects, can be for everybody is I extracted myself from this present moment. Africa has participated in a global economy for millennia. This is nothing new. It's just the dynamics that have changed. In fact, Africa and West Africa in particular, you have Nasozi, you have the Silk Road, you have the spice coast along East Africa. We have always participated in global commerce, but we've been at the forefront of it. Colonialism and so much shifted that dynamic where the terms and the benefits were extracted and we were no longer dictating those as African people. So I don't objectively think that globalization is a problem. I think this exploitative hyper-capitalism and globalization is the issue. But one of the ways to combat that is by setting the terms, by saying, okay, now we're in this new playing field. If you want to engage with or participate in our culture, this is how you do it. This is how you can do it ethically. But inviting and having other people participate is not a new phenomenon. Okay.
Let's go now on homes because you have been homes that you how do you balance your basic licensing with overall cultural
Can we say it clearly?
How did you balance showcasing licensing with overall cultural and national data? Because you have a strong, you have accepted Filipino as a country that you enter
Right.
So there's a mix between, you want to feature certain aesthetic with the object, but also it's people talking to
Right.
it's their personality. Those are
Yeah.
things that you don't necessarily always see with your eye.
Right. Right.
How do you balance that?
So in large part, I would say about, actually, maybe 3/4, there were 10 people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 of the 10 people, basically, well, one of them is me. And the remaining 6 are like friends. Your friends of mine. And then the other one that leaves us, the three people who I selected.
So you were already, since they were a friend, you were
Yeah.
already used to go to their house.
Yeah, we had a certain level of like comfortability, familiarity, and I also knew that they were already at that point pretty comfortable sharing their spaces. For example, Benito, he's an interior designer. He even now has his own book. So they were already kind of comfortable with that level of exposure. I know they had that Talea, who is in South Carolina, North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina. She has her home as a feature lessons and HGTV, etc. So that for me wasn't so much the concern, but I wanted to make sure that to some extent, and it didn't necessarily need to be homogenous, but I wanted to know their stories about how or why they have African decor in their home. And there's a range. Some people, it really is like Talea, it really is about who's African American. It really is about calling in her ancestry. That she's not necessarily familiar with exactly where she comes from, but she has a more, open and comfortable approach to generating of African decor. And And other people, it was, really about, I found this object, on a road trip, I loved it, so then I wanted to learn more about it. DeVito found a beautiful stool that's in the book that he found on a road trip between Texas and New Orleans. But then he went on to educate himself about it. So I also wanted to show there are different entry points, and not everybody's entry point has to be the same, because that's not the reality. But we can all come at it in different ways, but the common denominator needs to be that curiosity. It needs to be the ethical sourcing. Who did you get it from? Did they know what this object was, or was it just an African stool? No, where did it come from? So that was part of my creation process. It was as much about those stories as it was the aesthetics of the home. There was a New York Times journalist who was like really eager to be in the book, but she had no idea. Like, she had a beautiful home, a beautiful loft in Williamsburg, but she had no idea like what the Boomerang was, like what the ballet was. She was like, it's just cute. I was like, nope, you're not food.
That's very interesting. So can we say that you actually have a strong local connection in developing the article also more educated about article?
Yes, that's essential, absolutely essential component for that.
It's good. So with all your decade of experience in insurance, what can you tell us about the interior design scene today? Do you see that African Decor can become established, a trend? Because we were 2011, wow. Today's 2025, and now we have to look. Yeah. And now there is shops like this. What can you tell us about African design?
So in so many ways we've made advances, but almost to our detriment. Thank you. You know what? To our detriment. Because the popularization, all of like the hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears that we put into it, and where that meets technological advancement, there's a lot of design that's taking place through the digitization. And we are bypassed in that commercial transaction of it. And then when that happens, the cultural value gets devalued because it's completely removed from what the object is. I'll just use an example. There's a group, I keep coming across this super cloth wallpaper. And it's not, it's digitized, it's not sold by an African-owned or operated company, and the origin is even really acknowledged in the description online, and none of the proceeds are going back to any of the organizations or artisans that really are experts in this type of Cuba. So now that everybody knows about it, some people are taking it upon themselves to reproduce it, and in China or in other parts of Asia where there is a digitization or a digitization infrastructure, and the whole, again, the names are getting lost, the meaning is getting lost. So I think, again, that's why, this is one of the reasons why I made this book, and we really have to continue having these conversations and educating ourselves on even what this looks like. Because somebody might see this in the store or one that has been digitized, and they love it because it's beautiful. Why wouldn't you love it? But if they don't know that this is, a copyright or a copy, what do you call it, counterfeit of a Google Cloth pillow, then they'll buy it from that store without knowing, and then we're back at square one. So once we become more familiar with the objects and the names, then customers can make more informed decisions, interior designers can make more informed decisions, the profession can really be advocating actively on the preservation of cultural heritage and design.
So would you say that you want your book to be useful, and I guess to different fields, different sectors, not only the professional of digital design, but even more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much, and I think in part it touches back on, my urban planning, my very multidisciplinary urban planning experience in education is that there are components of women empowerment in here, and social development, economic development, reparations, colonialism, history. That's all in here. We begin the discussion around design. That's our foot into the door. But then we get into the door and we're talking about these things, cultural identity. And so it depends on, there's so many different, subjects and topics that we can really begin to explore and have, meaningful and constructive conversations around with this book.
So let's keep the conversation going on that part. I hear a lot since, we have been doing kind of renaissance about African culture, whether it's in fashion or design or community, food also is right. And sometimes I have many of my friends and people who sometimes they come to the store or whatever they see me wearing, and they're like, yeah, I have all of this African thing that is expensive. It's so expensive. So they look at this and they're like, yeah, but what if it's all African thing is so expensive? So it's something that always comes a lot and a lot and a lot. So would you say that African design or decor is accessible to everyone? Is it accessible to African folks? Yeah, what would you say to that?
I would say no, it's not accessible to everyone, and it doesn't have to be.
Okay.
Louis Vuitton is not accessible to everyone, Chanel is not accessible to everyone, and Jaguar, a Maserati. But when people want those things, guess what? They save their money, and they get them. As have I don't have a Maserati, but I remember the first when I really wanted a juju hat. I did not have enough money for a juju hat. I saved my money for an authentic juju hat. I saved my money for it because when you really want something and you value something, you save your money for it. And I don't know why there's this assumption or entitlement that everything that's African needs to be accessible to everybody.
I mean, not because accessible is, I'm not really sure that that's the word.
Right, cheap.
Cheap. It's the word.
Yeah.
Like, it has to be cheap.
And if anything, this is still, our objects are still fully not priced at what they could in fact be. And I think really when we peel it down, there is an assumption and a devaluation around African labor. Because if somebody were to make this here in Paris, if somebody were to make this in America, it would be probably $1,000. It would be €1,000. This is the same reason why Meta and Facebook outsource to India and they outsource to Kenya. It's not because they're altruists, it's because labor is cheaper there. And that is making a whole set of value assessments and judgments around the value of that person's existence in the world, and that's not okay. So we really want to break it down,
and it's handwoven.
And it's handwoven.
It's good that you're really talking about that. Since we talked about it, but recently we saw on social media, all the videos about all the great brands and actually costing $1,000, but in fact, the true value of it, is $50.
Right.
But it's probably sold at $3,000.
Yeah.
And it's not even handwoven.
Exactly.
Handmade. And Africans, whether it's fashion or interior design, it's still, we are actually still on the shores.
Yeah. Exactly. That's pastoral luxury.
And it doesn't cost the pricing on it.
Right.
It's not the same pricing.
Exactly. So those are my thoughts on that. I think the price could actually be much higher if we're really comparing apples to apples and saying this person's existence and this person's value and knowledge is on par with somebody outside of Africa. Then what should we say?
Yeah. Wow, I love that. We're getting almost to the end, and I want us to talk a little bit more maybe about so you both came out a few months ago. So what are the reaction, the reception, the public, you have been doing the report out so what is the reaction?
The reaction has been very positive from, a range of cities and people and ages and backgrounds. And people are like, we've been waiting for this. This book then. We've been waiting for this book. And so it's just been very affirmative, moving, to keep moving forward and I guess validating in a way too. Like, okay, I'm not the only one who is interested in this subject matter. But the response has been very encouraging and very positive.
From the public, are you only getting a reaction? Are you in touch with also the professionals who are working on design, interior designer, architect? Yeah. Is that the public that also you're getting in touch with people? And are you getting reaction from that?
I am not as much as or not distinctly as I would say the academic field. I've actually made a lot of inroads into academia because in a way that's one of the areas where I can have and that this type of book, especially the framework, can have the largest impact. Because once you are teaching the interior design and you're teaching the art historians, you're really, training their mindset to become the professionals. That's where I want my contribution to be. Like the interior designer, the ones who are already professionals and practicing, that's wonderful as well. But I want to get in early. I want to get into the game, early and have that influence.
It's good that you're talking about you talked a little bit earlier about the AI. Do you think that in a couple of years, how do you see the impact of AI in, providing a version, true version of designs and product design and interior design and even the writing, everything can be written by AI, the image can be created by AI. We are seeing books cover made by AI, we're seeing interior books with image made by AI. So how do you envision, because I love that when you talk about this is my first book, you say that this is my first book, so we're like, okay, we're already envisioning the second book and the collection. So how do you see as a interior designer and a writer now, how do you see a future with AI?
So in some regards, I think AI can be a tool, but I don't believe that AI can ever replace the human story. And I think that's why it's so important for us as
even the design.
I don't know. Because we are training AI, so still it's this like kind of mental gymnastics I'm still making with even trying to understand the scope of the possibility of AI. But I wish and I anticipate, and I think there is more of that in Europe than there is in the United States, where it's the wild west with everything, but some sort of governance. There has to be some sort of agreement in terms of what we can create, what I can be seen in our life. Right, exactly. So there has to be some baseline of governance and policies around what we can put. Otherwise, everything will become obsolete, and then we're just, robots. I don't it's scary dystopian. Sorry for going there. But I don't actually, because there's so much of me and like my human story and these human stories in the book. If AI can travel like 6 hours outside of Yaoundé and go to Barbès-Rochechouart and have tea with Honoré, like sure, yeah, I do that. But as far as I know, only a very dedicated, committed person will be able to do that.
But we have an example of a fabric brand who for 100 plus years were designing fabric on the entire African continent without putting a single foot on the So yeah, it's a real question, the fashion company actually they're concerned about that.
Right.
You mentioned how some design or limitation of food items have been applied, or people going up and buying, something.
Right.
That is true, and very
Right.
But still we have to.
We still have faith. That's that creative.
What can we wish you for people? What can we wish for you?
Just keep telling everybody, buying copies. I think, the book is very much a snapshot in time. A lot has changed since then. Even the homes that are photographed in the book, I'm about to sell the home, so I don't even live in that home anymore. And a lot of other people in the book have moved. Some of the artisans in the book, their lives have changed radically, both positively and negatively. One of the gentlemen, not one of the artisans, but Amisi's uncle, who there's a beautiful photo of in Uganda, he has passed away. So this is just a snapshot. And I want us to really just take away those human stories and to continue asking ourselves how we can decolonize our thinking in so many ways. Think about how we spend our hard-earned dollars and euros and what's the money in Sydney? Also dollars? Also dollars. Think about, how we want to spend those in a way that aligns with how hard we work for that. How hard we work for our money. Unless you don't work hard for money, then you don't have to. But how we can continue to have that meaningful impact. And I do believe that, money talks, and we vote with our feet, we vote with our currency, and we can make that difference. And what the guys are doing at the time, we tell them we don't want counterfeit goods, and we show them that with the reason of money. I believe very clearly.
Well, thank you very much, Nasozi, for now we can ask the public questions.
Michelle always has questions.
Thank you for that and for taking us through your process. It's really interesting. I have one question regarding the artisans. How did you find someone who's 6 hours outside of the UK? And why that person and not someone else? And then I'd love to understand, I guess, the connection of the ethnic artisanship in their own community. Because you're bringing it here for us to see
Right.
and these lovely ones as well. But how does their community work with that, live with it,
Yeah.
integrate it into their life?
Yeah.
And then second one is what's the second one?
Oh, that wasn't the second question? Sorry. Those are 3 questions. So the first one was
How did you find them?
how did I find it? So there's really a range. Some of the artisans I have been working with myself for years, and other instances like Mahush in Ethiopia, my friend Hannah had been working with him for years. So she put me in touch with her team on the ground, including the photographers who photographed her work. She's Ethiopian, American, Canadian. And yeah, we were friends and neighbors in Brooklyn. So I met her when she launched her home decor company. And then, like the gentleman Honoré in Pakistan, 6 hours outside of Yaoundé, that was wild because I didn't know anybody who went to Cameroon. It was a friend of a friend who put me in touch with her friend's brother. It was crazy. And I met this man at the airport and we had pictures of each other on the phone. And he was basically like my fixer, like my host for the trip. I had my own Airbnb, but he and his family basically adopted me for 2 weeks. And he knew that. He knew the area where, so Honoré makes the babileke tables, the tabouret babileke, and they are only made in one specific region of Cameroon. That is the only place where they come from in this world. So we made a beeline. We made a beeline for there, and once we got there, we started asking around. And so they say, oh, this is La Place ou Bay Babileke. That's how we found it. So there was a range. Some people I knew already, and some people I literally didn't know until it was happening. Yeah. So there was a range. And then your other question was what?
How did the artisans take the craft and the
Yes.
products, like,
How does it fit into their lives? Yeah. So in many ways, I think they're negotiating a certain dynamic intention because it's still all of these objects still carry a traditional and customary significance in their culture, but they also are selling them and have to sell them in many cases for their own, economic employment and livelihood. So there's also a tension there that I wish I would have explored with them. Like, how do you feel like selling something that's also a reflection, a cultural object? And that came up a little bit, in fact, with Madame Adele, who, in fact, this is her particular cooperative in Kinshasa. She's the one in the book. So she and her cooperative made these pillows. And so, like, literally, like these physical pillows. These are hers that she made. These actual.
Without us knowing.
Yeah, we did it.
Not coincidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, interestingly enough, she said that she loves that her culture is being shared around the world. And that's one thing, too, that I find. Of course, Africa is not a monolith, it's not homogenous, but there's not instinctively this, like, territorial attitude toward what we have and toward our culture and heritage. And she's like, I love that. It's around the world and people get to enjoy it in Cuba and see it in other places. I don't know that she fully made the connection that it's also being counterfeited and pirated and printed in a way that doesn't benefit her or the culture at all. But she loved that people get to see, Cuba around the world. So, in other instances too, the baskets that are right next to the shell on the table, I think those are coming from Rwanda, but we have the same ones in Kenya and in Uganda. And when I first started bringing those to, like, when I would leave Uganda and bring them for friends, and my cousins would go to the market with me and they'd be like, why are you taking this back to America? Like, what do they do with this there? Like, they're like, because there you either use it for, like, like beans, or if you're like simmering different beans or rice, and or you use it to carry gifts during a wedding. But it's not a decorative. You don't put it on the wall. But they're so beautiful. So there's still this aesthetic relationship to it, even though it's utilitarian. We still put pride into the aesthetics of the looks. But yeah, even I was at a wedding in Uganda a couple of weeks ago, and so they're still using weddings. That's how we use it there.
And the book, the next one.
What about it?
What is it?
That's a good question. I've committed to finishing the outline. Now that I already have the book, I don't have to do a full proposal again. I just have to submit an outline, but I'm committing to finishing the outline before I leave Paris. So please hold me to that. I've just been, yes. This is live.
Hello everyone, my name is Kofi. Hello everyone, my name is Kofi. I'm from Togo originally. And first of all, thank you for sharing your experience with us today. I actually have 2 questions. To be able to create your book, have you had to cross villages in Africa to be able to meet the artists, for example, or other people? And if yes, Um, have you faced some struggles, for example, to put pictures of creation of what they're doing? Because being from Togo, I know that West African countries can have a long history of not being so comfortable of being taken pictures.
Yeah.
So how did you experience that?
Yes, thank you for those questions. Like, those are really important topics to address. I did traverse a series of villages from, west to east to southern Africa, and for me, this is intangible. But I entered every village, every home, every artisan's space very humbly. And also with somebody who's from there. And many times it was not only a practical component because I wasn't, speaking the language, even if they were, Francophone or Anglophone, they're, still the local languages that I don't speak. So having somebody with me who's from the community, from the culture, also lended me a certain reputation and legitimacy when entering into those spaces that made it easy for me. I didn't in fact face really anybody like pushing me against in that way, but I was also very detailed and explained. And I think to some extent too, a lot of the people were proud and surprised to see an African woman doing this work, because it's always been, it has just about always been a white person. So they were curious, and I also made my story available. I wasn't just telling their stories or taking in their stories, but I would show them pictures of my home and my son, and once you tell them your mom in Africa, they're like, oh, okay. So oftentimes I love with that. I'm like, yeah, my son, you want to know your mom? So just, breaking the ice and bringing it down to our human level. Like, what are the things that we have in common? So I shared parts of my story with people as well. I made sure to do that. And I didn't really face, there was only one instance where we were looking for the Barbès shield artisans. And there was just one group that was trying, they asked for an exorbitant amount of money, where even my host, Jacqueline Ngo, he was like, I didn't even know the argument or the negotiation that was taking place. All I know is 1 minute we're there, the next minute he's like, let's go. He was like, we're out of it. And then we found somebody else. But other than that, people were always very receptive and welcoming, and it was fun. It was fun for everybody. Yeah, thank you for your question. Right.
Thank you for this presentation. I would like to understand during all your business trips, in all the countries you visited, how was the difficulties for this cooperative to organize themselves in business? Because all of these are business, right? Or how they create a company, and how they create the brand, or if they protect the brand. So that's a few questions.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a range in which the cooperatives were organized at different levels and layers. And what I found was that a lot of it, how structured they were, ultimately had a lot to do with how much support or recognition they received from their federal government. So in Morocco, for example, the artisans receive a lot of support. They receive opportunities, they receive subsidies from the kingdom, where they can go on expositions, or they can get a low interest loan to, improve their line of credit. Whereas that's not the case in Uganda, or in Cameroon. But at the same time, because the way so many African livelihoods have always existed outside of and beyond the, you know, capabilities of government. We're resourceful people. So in Cameroon, the women have their own type of financial banking system where they, it's called buy and sell. And in the book, I use the actual word that they gave me, which is going to mispronounce. So maybe, I don't know if you know, but you know what I'm talking about. Where they, every month, they collect money, they put it in a common fund. But there's a non-French word for it. That's the one I because we have that in so many cultures, even in the Caribbean it exists in, that's how our communities have managed when we have to leave home and leave our home countries and go to these strange places when the weather is cold or like what's going on. So, you know, there are informal and formal infrastructures, but to some extent, if you want to really scale as a business, you need to be tapped in. You need the support of the government because you need, you know, there's duties and taxes, and you need good roads to get your markets, your products to the market. And then many of these countries, the primary markets tend to be the capital, but the work is not produced in the capital. Like really the core of the cultures are outside of the capital. So there's a lot of variation. And that comes through in the book as well. It's like, so how I did ask, you know, questions around what their business structure looks like, and if they get support, also what that looks like, whether it's government or community or independent. So there's a range there.
I love the photos in the book, and I noticed that there's different photographers involved. I don't know if any of them were yours or your friends. How did you select the photos that ended up in the book? And could you talk a bit about the cover photo?
Yeah, okay. So there are about 300 pictures in the book, and I took three-quarters of the photos in the book myself. And those pictures that I didn't take, I had a shot list for like a very specific shot list for the photographers who I hired to conduct the other photo shoots. And I hired them based on basically references and having seen their work, and also wanting to, I prioritize African photographers and photographers who are from those countries and spaces. So that's how I went about the photographer bit for those photographs that I couldn't take myself. So still had a heavy hand in like the art direction and through the shot list and an sample photographs. And then the cover on the book, or the photo on the book, that's kind of a funny story because I initially didn't want this photo on the book. I don't remember which one it was. But it came down to like 3, and I literally just like turned to my son, and I was like, "These are the options that we have." He basically chose this. I mean, I love this house. The house wouldn't even be in the book if it weren't one that I love. But yeah, I felt that, and this was kind of a back and forth that I had with sales and marketing team because this is still very much like this is a commercial publisher, and so they had a different set of like parameters and criteria than I did as the author. And I just felt like this picture, I'll just be honest with you, I felt like it didn't have enough African decor in it. Like there's one stool. And they were like, you know, we don't need to do too much. There was even another, like if you turned a little bit this way in the room, there was like a whole beautiful sofa with indigo pillows. I'm like, can we use the other photograph? But they had this whole like sales pitch for utilizing this picture. And ultimately, honestly too, like once you get to the end of your like manuscript or the end of it, what they call it, decision fatigue.
Yes.
I'm just like, just do it.
Yeah.
Like, fine.
Yeah.
I love it, but you know, that's
exactly
the brutal
my question.
honesty.
Like, who really selected the photos inside the book? I imagine there's way more that, you know, collaborate.
Yeah.
I was just wondering how much of it is your own
Right.
curatorial
Yeah.
decision making for putting those photos, specific photos?
So inside the book was actually pretty much, that was all me. That was all me. By the time we got, and the cover is usually the last thing they design. So I did mess up, but by the time we got to the cover, I was so tired. Yeah. I was like, let's just launch the book.
It's true that if you don't know,
Right. Exactly.
you will be like, oh, what is that?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I'm sure the people in the sales and marketing team don't know African Decor. I doubt they really know that.
Well, like, well, this is African, this is African,
Yeah.
African, it was African.
So exactly. So that's the reality of it.
That's why we need people in the room.
Yep.
We need diversity.
Exactly. Precisely.
Yeah.
But I will also say, I did have in my, and this is important too, if you all don't want to write a book, you can put in your contract that you have the final say on the cover and the title. That's something actually that just, that was the third thing I was thinking of, I couldn't remember yesterday. She said make sure you put in a clause in your contract that says no moving forward unless you as the author agree to the title and the cover design. So I did. I mean, I did greenlight it, and I don't regret that. Yeah, because that's the picture. Thank you for that question. Thank you.
So you can keep, we have some refreshment.
Yes.
We're going to do some music. You can keep talking to the Nasozi here. And I'll have you sign just right here.
Oh, cool. How do we end it now?